Ding!
As the secret project took shape in the hidden base, Matthew wiped the sweat from his brow and leaned back from the glowing display. The schematics for Murloc's revolutionary orbital energy collector filled the screen, a dizzying array of interlocking components and arcane equations. Zara glanced up from her own workstation, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she bolstered their digital defenses. "I've got a batch of new drones ready to deploy," she said, her voice tight with tension. "Should give us a bit more early warning if anyone comes snooping." Matthew nodded. "Good. We're going to need all the edge we can get." He turned to where Murloc was hunched over a workbench, soldering intricate circuitry with intense focus. "How's the miniaturization process coming?" The Talarian engineer grunted, not looking up from his delicate task. "Slowly. This tech was never meant to be shrunk down to this scale. But I'll make it work. Just need more time." Kyloth burst into the workshop, his flight suit still zipped up from his latest supply run. "That's the one thing we're running out of," the pilot said grimly. "Word on the street is that Karn is on the warpath. He's put his top commander on our scent. Won't be long before they zero in on us." An oppressive silence fell over the room, the weight of their precarious situation sinking in. Matthew felt the responsibility of leadership pressing down on his shoulders. So many lives were counting on them, not just their own, but the fate of 2 entire civilizations. Failure was not an option. He straightened up, squaring his shoulders. "Then we dig deep and find a way to get it done. We've come too far to quit now. Zara, do whatever you can to shore up our surveillance net. We need to stay one step ahead of Sark and his death squad. Kyloth, we're going to need a stockpile of supplies. Food, water, medical gear, anything to keep us going if we get cut off. And Murloc, just keep cracking away at that technical puzzle. Make the impossible happen." Matthew looked around at his ragtag crew, the renegade engineer, the fugitive pilot, the human hacker prodigy. Alone, they were nothing. But together, united by a common cause, they had a chance to reshape the future. "This is it, people," he told them, his voice ringing with steadfast perseverance. "The endgame, everything on the line. Time to show the Talarians what humans are really made of. So let's get to it." As the team threw themselves back into their desperate labors with renewed intensity, the walls seemed to close in around them. Somewhere out there in the sprawling Talarian city, a lethal enemy was methodically hunting them. The clock was ticking. The noose was tightening. All they could do was work and pray that destiny was on their side. As the weight of their mission pressed down on the weary rebels, Matthew knew they needed a miracle. And that miracle was the Nova Crystal capacitors, the key to unlocking the Rigel 7 collector's full potential. Without them, all their sacrifices would be in vain. Matthew turned to Raxar, the hulking Krogan mercenary who had become an unlikely ally. "I need your help," he said, his voice low and urgent. "We have to get our hands on those capacitors, and you're the only one with the connections to make it happen." Raxar's reptilian eyes gleamed in the dim light of the workshop. "It won't be easy," he rumbled. "The Talarians guard their tech like a clutch of starving Varen, but I know a guy who might be able to point us in the right direction." Matthew nodded grimly. "Whatever it takes, we're out of options." The plan came together quickly, an audacious attempt born of necessity. Raxar used his black market contacts to track the shipment of capacitors, while Zara and Murloc pored over transit schedules and security protocols, searching for any weakness they could exploit. When the time came, they moved like a well-oiled machine. Raxar's contact provided the diversion, drawing the Talarian guards away from the shipment with a false alert. Matthew and Raxar struck hard and fast, breaching the cargo hold and securing the capacitors. But their victory was short-lived. As they made their escape, Talarian security forces converged on their position, weapons blazing. Matthew dove for cover, his heart pounding as energy bolts sizzled past his head. Beside him, Raxar let out a bellowing war cry, his massive shotgun roaring as he returned fire. The Krogan was a force of nature, unstoppable in his fury, but even he could not hold back the tide forever. Matthew saw the Talarian sergeant a moment too late. Krull, Sark's vicious right hand, bore down on him like an avenging demon, his blade flashing in the chaos of battle. Matthew raised his rifle, but Krull was faster, lunging forward and knocking the weapon aside. The serrated edge of Krull's combat knife filled Matthew's vision as the sergeant grabbed him by the throat, slamming him against the wall. Spots danced before Matthew's eyes as he gasped for breath, the cold steel pressing into his flesh. But before Krull could finish the job, a shadow fell over them both. Raxar, bloodied but unbowed, wrapped his huge hands around the Talarian's head and wrenched him away from Matthew. The two titans clashed in a brutal melee, fists and feet smashing into flesh and bone. It was a fight that could only end one way. With a sickening crunch, Raxar snapped Krull's neck, letting the lifeless body slump to the ground. The Krogan turned to Matthew, his craggy face split by a predatory grin. "No one kills my client but me," he rumbled. They made it back to the base with the capacitors, but the theft had sent shockwaves through the Talarian hierarchy. The rebels had painted a target on their backs, and now every gun in the city would be aimed their way. Zara worked feverishly to integrate the Nova crystals into the collector's superstructure, her face pale and drawn in the electric glow of the energy matrix. "This is insane," she muttered, her fingers flying over the controls. "We're trying to bottle a star here. One mistake and we could vaporize half the district." But there was no turning back now. They were committed, for better or worse. As the collector thrummed with almost unchecked power, Matthew allowed himself a moment of hope. With this device, they could change everything, reshape the balance of power in the galaxy. That fragile hope shattered with the scream of a proximity alert. Zara's head snapped up, her eyes wide with fear. "Perimeter breach," she said, her voice shaking. "We've got incoming." On the security monitors, Matthew saw a sleek, predatory shape glide through the shadows of the base's outer corridors. His blood ran cold as he recognized the sinuous form, the polished carapace. A Zephyr Syndicate assassin, one of the galaxy's most feared killers. The rebels grabbed their weapons, steeling themselves for battle. They had beaten the odds before, through luck and sheer grit. But as the first explosions rocked the base and the screams of the dying filled the air, Matthew knew that their time had finally run out. The Rigel 7 Collector was their last hope, their only chance to create a new future. And now, with everything on the line, they would have to fight like never before to keep that dream alive. In the heart of the rebel stronghold, surrounded by enemies on every side, Matthew and his band of renegades prepared to make their final stand. The hope of the universe hung in the balance, and they were the only ones left to tip the scales. It was time to show the Talarians, the Syndicate, and anyone else who would stand in their way what true courage looked like. Time to light the spark that would set the stars ablaze. Time to make the impossible happen one last time. The rebel base shuddered as another explosion rocked its foundations. Matthew's heart raced as he watched Zara's frantic movements at her console, her face illuminated by the flickering emergency lights. "They've breached the outer perimeter," she reported, her voice tight with tension. "Sark's death squad is inside." A stream of data scrolled across her screen, detailing the brutal efficiency of the Talarian forces as they systematically eliminated resistance throughout the facility. Matthew's mind reeled as he realized the magnitude of their predicament. "How?" he demanded. "Our security protocols." "Compromised," Zara cut him off. "They must have captured someone who knew enough to point them in our direction." The sound of distant weapons fire grew louder, punctuated by the screams of the dying. Matthew made a split-second decision. "Initiate evacuation protocols," he ordered. "We need to get the collector out of here now." Raxar hefted his massive shotgun, a predatory gleam in his reptilian eyes. "Leave the fighting to me," he growled. "I'll buy you the time you need." Kyloth nodded grimly, checking the charge on his blaster. "I'll cover the main corridor. No one gets through without paying in blood." As the two warriors moved to their positions, Matthew turned to Murloc. The Talarian engineer was already in motion, his nimble fingers dancing across the collector's control interface. "How long until we can move this thing?" Matthew asked. Murloc's face was a mask of concentration. "It's not ready," he muttered. "The containment field is unstable. If we try to activate it now—" Another explosion, closer this time. The acrid smell of smoke filled the air. "We don't have a choice," Matthew said. Do what you can. We launch in 5 minutes. The next few moments were a blur of frantic activity. Murloc and Zara worked feverishly to prepare the half-finished collector for transit, while the sounds of battle drew ever closer. Matthew coordinated the remaining rebels, ensuring vital data and equipment were secured for transport. A scream of pain cut through the chaos. Matthew turned to see Zara slumped over her console, blood seeping from a wound in her side. A stray energy bolt had found its mark. Kyloth was at her side in an instant, his face grim as he assessed the damage. "It's bad," he said, meeting Matthew's eyes. "She won't make it to the ship." Time seemed to slow as Matthew processed the implications. They couldn't leave Zara behind, not with the wealth of classified information in her head, but evacuating her would slow them down, potentially dooming them all. Zara's weak voice broke the moment of indecision. "The self-destruct," she gasped. "I can trigger it. Buy you time." Matthew felt his throat tighten. "Zara, no." "It's the only way," Kyloth interrupted, his tone brooking no argument. "I'll stay with her. Make sure it gets done." There was no time for prolonged farewells. Matthew clasped Kyloth's shoulder, nodding once in silent gratitude. Then he was moving, shouting orders as the remnants of the rebel force converged on their escape vessel. The prototype collector craft hummed with untested power as they launched, the inertial compensators straining to keep up with their desperate acceleration. Behind them, the rebel base erupted in a cataclysmic fireball, taking Zara, Kyloth, and a significant portion of Sark's forces with it. But their respite was short-lived. Talarian pursuit ships screamed out of the planet's atmosphere, weapons blazing. Matthew's hands flew over the unfamiliar controls as he pushed the collector to its limits. "We need more power," he shouted to Murloc. "Can you bring the main capacitors online?" The Talarian engineer's face was etched with concern. "If I do, there's no telling what might happen. This system wasn't designed for combat." A near miss rocked the ship, decision made for them. As Murloc activated the collector's power core, Matthew input the coordinates for a desperate jump to the Rigel 7 system. The stars blurred around them as they hurtled through space, but Matthew found no comfort in their escape. His mind raced with the implications of what they had built. The Rigel 7 collector, designed as a tool for peace, could be weaponized into something terrible. As Sark's squadron closed in on their position, Matthew faced an impossible choice: use the collector as a weapon and betray everything they had fought for, or stay true to their ideals and face certain death. The violent corona of Rigel 7 loomed before them, a crucible that would test not just their survival, but the very soul of their revolution. The Rigel 7 collector ship shuddered as another volley of Talarian energy bolts slammed into its shields. Matthew's hands flew over the controls, desperately trying to coax more speed from the experimental craft. "Murloc!" he shouted over the din of alarms and failing systems. "We need that collector online now!" The Talarian engineer's face was a mask of concentration as he worked feverishly at his console. "I'm trying, but the systems weren't designed for this kind of stress. If we push it too hard, we could lose containment entirely." Raxar growled from his position at the weapons station. "Better to die in a blaze of glory than be taken by Sark's dogs." A groan from behind them drew Matthew's attention. Zara lay on a makeshift medical cot, her face pale and drawn. The hastily applied Medigel was barely holding her together. "How much longer?" she asked weakly. Matthew's teeth gritted. "We're almost there, just hold on." The violent corona of Rigel 7 filled their view screen, a roiling sea of plasma and electromagnetic chaos. It was their last hope, and potentially their doom. "Sark's squadron is closing fast," Raxar reported. "We can't outrun them much longer." Matthew made a decision that would haunt him for years to come. "Murloc, forget safety protocols. Bring the collector online at full power." The Talarian engineer's eyes widened. "But sir, without proper calibration, it could—" "Do it!" Murloc hesitated for a split second, then plunged his hands into the holographic interface. The ship's engines surged with newfound energy as the collector came to life, drinking in the raw power of Rigel 7. Warning klaxons blared as energy readouts spiked far beyond their intended parameters. Matthew felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end as the air crackled with hardly restrained power. "It's working," Murloc said, his voice filled with equal parts awe and terror. "But I can't control the energy flow. We're taking in more than the systems can handle." Matthew's mind raced. They couldn't sustain this level of power for long, but maybe they could use it to their advantage. He turned to Raxar. "Can you route that excess energy to the weapon systems?" The Krogan's eyes gleamed with savage anticipation. "Oh yes, I can do that." As Sark's fighters closed in for the kill, Matthew made the call that would change everything. "Target the lead ships and fire." A beam of pure stellar energy erupted from the collector, slicing through space like the wrath of an angry god. The Talarian ships never stood a chance. In seconds, half of Sark's squadron was reduced to superheated vapor. The remaining fighters scattered in panic, but it was too late. Raxar, caught up in the intoxicating power at his fingertips, fired again and again. When the energy surge finally subsided, only debris remained where Sark's elite force had been. For a moment, there was silence on the bridge. Then Murloc spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "By the spirits, what have we done?" Matthew stared at the destruction they had wrought, his stomach churning. They had survived, yes, but at what cost? The collector, meant to be a source of clean energy for billions, had just been turned into the most devastating weapon the galaxy had ever seen. A weak voice broke through his spiraling thoughts. "Matt," Zara called out, her breathing labored. Did we make it?" He moved to her side, taking her hand in his. "We did. We're safe now." Zara managed a small smile before her eyes fluttered closed. Her grip on Matthew's hand went slack. "No," Matthew whispered. No, Zara, stay with me." But it was too late. Zara, brilliant engineer and loyal friend, was gone. As the reality of their situation sank in, Matthew felt the weight of leadership bear down on him like never before. They had survived, but at a terrible price. The Collector's power had been revealed to the galaxy in the worst possible way. He could already imagine the waves of fear and anger that would sweep through the Talarian Imperium. The hardliners would use this as proof that humans were too dangerous to be trusted. And General Karn would stop at nothing now to get his hands on the Collector. Matthew looked at his remaining team, Murloc, shell-shocked and guilt-ridden, and Raxar, still riding the high of their Pyrrhic victory. They had started this journey to bring hope to the oppressed peoples of the galaxy. Now, they might have just made everything far, far worse. As Rigel 7 burned in the view screen behind them, Matthew knew their real battle was only just beginning. They had unleashed a power that could reshape the galaxy or tear it apart. Somehow they would have to find a way to put this genie back in the bottle before it was too late. But first they needed to regroup, to mourn their losses, and to decide what kind of revolutionaries they truly wanted to be. The Collector hummed with latent energy, a constant reminder of the awesome responsibility they now carried. Matthew took a deep breath, steeling himself for the challenges ahead. "Set a course for the Outer Rim," he ordered. "We need to disappear until we can figure out our next move." As the ship leapt into hyperspace, leaving the Rigel system behind, Matthew couldn't shake the feeling that they had crossed a line from which there was no return. The galaxy would never be the same, and neither would they. The Collector ship emerged from hyperspace, its hull still bearing the scars of their desperate battle at Rigel 7. Matthew stood at the viewport, watching as unfamiliar stars blazed into view. Behind him, the bridge hummed with subdued activity as his crew worked to assess their situation. "Status report," Matthew said, his voice tight with fatigue. Murloc's fingers danced across his console. "We've successfully reached the Outer Rim, but our systems are strained. The Collector's power core is barely stable after our unconventional use of it." Matthew nodded, the weight of their actions pressing down on him. The image of Sark's squadron vaporizing in that terrible burst of energy was seared into his mind. He turned to address his team, but the words caught in his throat as he saw the empty station where Zara should have been. A priority transmission cut through the somber atmosphere. Matthew's brow furrowed as he recognized the encryption. "It's from our contact in the Talarian moderate faction," he said, activating the holographic display. The message was brief. but its impact hit like a shockwave. Their actions at Rigel 7 had sent ripples of fear and outrage through the galaxy. Alien factions that had once sympathized with their cause were now distancing themselves, horrified by the destructive potential of the Collector. "They're calling us warmongers," Raxar growled, reading over Matthew's shoulder. "Savages who can't be trusted with advanced technology." Matthew's expression resolute. "This is exactly what we were trying to prevent," he said. "We can't let Sark and his hardliners control the narrative." As if summoned by his words, another transmission cut through their deliberations. This one bore the signature of Governor Frazek, a respected Krauthan diplomat known for her advocacy of interspecies cooperation. "Patch her through," Matthew ordered, straightening his posture. Governor Frazek's hologram materialized before them, her reptilian features set in an expression of grave concern. "Commander Matthew," she began, her voice rich with empathy, "I've been following the reports of your recent encounter with Sark's forces. I fear the situation has become untenable." Matthew felt a flicker of hope. If they could win over someone of Frazek's standing, perhaps they could salvage their reputation. "Governor, I assure you, our intentions—" Frazek held up a hand, silencing him. "Intentions matter little in the face of such devastating power. However, I believe there may still be a path forward. I wish to meet with you to discuss how we might de-escalate this crisis." Matthew exchanged glances with Murloc and Raxar. The Talarian engineer looked skeptical, but Raxar nodded encouragingly. "Very well, Governor," Matthew said. "We'll transmit coordinates for a neutral meeting point." As Frazek's hologram faded, Matthew couldn't shake a nagging sense of unease. But with their options dwindling and allies scarce, what choice did they have? "Set a course for the Corvus system," he ordered. "We'll rendezvous with Governor Frazek there and see if we can't salvage this mess." Little did Matthew know that as their ship jumped once more into hyperspace, carrying the awesome power of the Collector with it, a web of betrayal and deadly intent was already closing around them. Aboard his flagship, General Karn received Frazek's coded transmission with a cruel smile. "Excellent work, my dear," he purred. "Keep them talking. My new associates will handle the rest." In the shadows of Karn's war room, a lithe figure detached itself from the darkness. Mardeth, the Unmaker, deadliest of the Gaivarine, flexed her razor-sharp claws in anticipation of the hunt to come. The trap was set. All that remained was for Matthew and his idealistic rebels to spring it. The Corvus system materialized around them as the Collector ship dropped out of hyperspace. Matthew's unease intensified as he scanned the seemingly empty expanse before them. "I don't like this," Raxar growled, his reptilian eyes narrowing. "It's too quiet." Before Matthew could respond, proximity alarms blared. A massive Talarian warship decloaked directly ahead, its weapons already charging. "It's a trap!" Murloc shouted, his hands flying across the controls. Matthew's mind raced. "Evasive maneuvers! Raxar, ready the—" His words were cut short as a searing pain exploded behind his eyes. He stumbled, clutching his head as a psychic assault tore through his consciousness. Through blurred vision, he saw a lithe, shadowy figure materialize on the bridge. Mardeth the Unmaker, her razor-sharp claws glinting in the emergency lights. "The Collector?" Matthew gasped, fighting against the mental onslaught. "Protect the data." With his last coherent thought, Matthew initiated an emergency transfer of the Collector's operating codes to a secure data core. Then his world went dark. Chaos erupted on the bridge. Raxar roared, charging at Mardeth with berserker fury. Murloc frantically worked to break them free of the warship's tractor beam. A new voice cut through the mayhem. Kyloth, their skilled pilot, who had been monitoring systems from the auxiliary bridge. "Hang on!" Kyloth's voice crackled over the comms. "I'm going to try something insane." The ship lurched violently as Kyloth executed a series of maneuvers that should have torn the vessel apart. Somehow, they broke free of the tractor beam and hurtled away from Karn's ambush. "We need to jump now," Murloc shouted. "Where to?" Raxar, bleeding from a dozen wounds inflicted by Mardeth's poison claws, punched in coordinates. "Zarkris refueling outpost. It's our only chance." The stars blurred once more as they fled into hyperspace, leaving behind the shattered remains of their hopes for a peaceful resolution. Hours later, the battered ship limped into the Zarkris system. The refueling outpost hung against the backdrop of a desolate asteroid field, a ramshackle collection of modules and docking arms. As they approached, a gruff voice hailed them. "Unidentified vessel, state your business or be vaped." "Voxel, you paranoid old bastard," Raxar wheezed, still weak from his encounter with Mardeth. "It's Raxar. We need help." There was a long pause before Voxel responded. "Raxar? What in the seven hells are you doing out here?" Another pause. "Fine, dock at Arm 3, and you'd better have a damn good explanation." The collector ship, now barely holding together, docked with agonizing slowness. Voxel, a grizzled human with cybernetic implants crisscrossing his face, met them at the airlock with a scowl and a raised pulse rifle. His expression softened slightly as he took in their battered state. "You look like you've been through a meat grinder. What happened to—" He stopped short, noticing Matthew's absence. Murloc shook his head, his voice heavy. "We lost him. Mardeth the Unmaker." Voxel's cybernetic eye whirred as it focused on the secure data core clutched in Murloc's arms. "That what I think it is?" Raxar nodded. "The Collector's operating codes. It's all we have left." Voxel's scowl deepened. "I'm not looking to get caught up in your revolution, Raxar. I've got a business to run." "A business that won't mean shit if Karn takes control of the entire sector," Raxar countered. "We need a place to regroup, to figure out our next move." Voxel considered for a long moment, then sighed. "Fine, but you keep a low profile, and if anyone comes sniffing around, you're on your own." As they followed Voxel into the outpost's grimy interior, Murloc activated the data core. His eyes widened as he scanned the information. "By the spirits," he whispered. "Matthew, you clever bastard." "What is it?" Kyloth asked, leaning in. Murloc looked up, a spark of hope in his eyes. "Coordinates to something called the Axiom Vault." Raxar's head snapped up. "The Axiom Vault? That's just a myth." "Maybe not," Murloc said. "And if the legends are true, it could change everything." As the implications sank in, a new willpower settled over the ragtag group. They had lost much, but perhaps now they had found a way to turn the tide. Little did they know that light years away, the ruthless Captain Frax was already on their trail, drawn by the promise of power beyond imagining. The collector ship's engines sputtered and died as they emerged from their latest desperate jump. Alarms blared throughout the vessel, warning of critical fuel depletion. "We're running on fumes," Kyloth announced, his voice tight with tension. "One more jump, and we're dead in space." Murloc's fingers flew across the navigation console. "We need somewhere to hide, fast. Karn and Frax can't be far behind." Raxar leaned over the sensor readouts, his reptilian eyes narrowing. "There," he growled, pointing to a swirling mass of energy on the display. "The Kalrathi's void. Its radiation field might mask our signature." "It's suicide," Kyloth protested. "The void will tear us apart." Murloc set his jaw. "We don't have a choice. Make the jump." The stars blurred once more as they plunged into the chaotic maelstrom of the Kalrathi's void. Tendrils of crackling energy lashed against the hull, threatening to rip the ship apart. Kyloth wrestled with the controls, fighting to keep them on course. As they emerged from the worst of the turbulence, proximity alarms blared. A massive freighter loomed before them, its hull scarred and pitted from countless close encounters with the void's energy storms. A gruff voice crackled over the comms. "Unidentified vessel, you're in restricted space. Prepare to be boarded or be destroyed." Murloc exchanged glances with his crew. They were in no shape for a fight. "This is Murloc of the trading vessel Stardust," he improvised. "We've suffered damage and are low on fuel. Requesting assistance." There was a long pause before the voice responded. "Dock at Airlock 3. Any funny business and we'll space the lot of you." As they maneuvered alongside the freighter, Raxar growled, "I don't like this. It stinks of a setup." Murloc nodded grimly. "Stay alert and keep the collector close." The airlock cycled open, revealing a grizzled human with a cybernetic eye and a pulse rifle trained on them. Behind him stood a Gorman female, her tentacle-like appendages twitching with barely concealed aggression. "I'm Captain Orlick," the man growled. "This is my first mate, Rickax. Now what's a bunch of ragtag rebels doing in my neck of the woods?" Murlock's eyes widened. "How did you—" Orlick tapped his cybernetic eye. "This beauty sees more than you'd think, including that fancy bit of tech you're trying to hide." Before anyone could react, Orlick fired a pulse of energy that knocked them off their feet. In the confusion, he snatched the collector from Murlock's grasp. "Thanks for the delivery, boys," Orlick sneered. "This'll fetch a pretty price on the black market." But as he turned to leave, Rickax's tentacles lashed out, wrapping around the collector. "Sorry, Captain," she hissed, "but I've got other plans." In a blur of motion, Rickax tossed the collector back to Murlock. "We need to talk," she said urgently. "Your collector might be the key to something big, something that could change everything." Orlick snarled, raising his weapon, but Raxar was faster. The Talarian's massive fist connected with Orlick's jaw, sending him crashing to the deck. "What do you know?" Murlock demanded, clutching the collector tightly. Rickax's eyes gleamed. "Have you ever heard of the Dead Star Trail?" As Rickax spoke of ancient ruins and hidden coordinates, Murlock felt a surge of hope. Perhaps Matthew's final gift would lead them to salvation after all. But little did they know that light years away, the merciless Captain Frax was already closing in, drawn by the promise of power beyond imagining. The Dead Star Trail's final wormhole spat them out into a sea of chaos. Murlock's eyes widened as he took in the scene before them, a vast armada of ships, their hulls gleaming with malice. "By the spirits," Raxar growled, his claws digging into the console. "It's Karn and Frehax. They found us." Kyloth's hands flew over the controls, desperately trying to stabilize their trajectory. "We're sitting ducks out here." As if to punctuate his words, a barrage of energy bolts slammed into their shields, sending tremors through the freighter's hull. "Evasive maneuvers," Murlock shouted. "Orlick, get us out of here." The grizzled captain threw himself into the pilot's seat, his cybernetic eye whirring as it processed the battlefield. "Hold on to your asses," he growled, punching in a series of commands. The ship lurched sickeningly as Orlick engaged the prototype wormhole drive. Space twisted around them, reality itself seeming to tear as they plunged into a series of micro-jumps. Ravager torpedoes screamed past, missing them by mere meters. Karn's dreadnoughts unleashed devastating volleys from their turbo lasers, filling space with deadly energy. "The drive's unstable," Rickax shouted, her tentacles flying over the engineering console. "We can't keep this up." As if to prove her point, their next jump went horribly wrong. The fabric of space-time buckled, and for a heart-stopping moment, they found themselves teetering on the edge of a black hole's event horizon. Metal screamed as gravitational forces threatened to tear the ship apart. Murlock felt his body stretching, distorting in ways that shouldn't be possible. With a Herculean effort, Orlick wrenched them free, but the damage was done. Alarms blared throughout the ship, warning of multiple system failures. "We're out of options," Raxar snarled, blood trickling from a gash on his forehead. "We need to fight back." Murlock stared at the collector, its crystalline surface pulsing with otherworldly energy. A terrible realization dawned on him. "It's not just a drive," he whispered. "It's a weapon, the most powerful one ever created." He explained his theory, watching as understanding and horror dawned on his companions' faces. "You can't be serious," Kyloth protested. "The destruction would be—" His words were cut off as a Ravager disruptor blast tore through their weakened shields. Rickax threw herself in front of Murlock, her body absorbing the brunt of the energy. She collapsed, her tentacles twitching weakly. "Rickax!" Murlock cradled her, feeling the life ebbing from her body. In that moment, his hesitation vanished. "Initiate the overload sequence," he ordered, his voice cold with drive. "We end this now." As Murlock's fingers danced across the collector's surface, reality itself seemed to hold its breath. The ship shuddered, exotic particles flooding its systems. Outside, the enemy fleets converged, their weapons trained on the rebel vessel. They had no idea of the apocalypse about to be unleashed. A blinding light erupted from the heart of their ship, followed by an impossible silence. Then, with a sound like the death cry of the universe itself, space tore open. The subspace rupture expanded exponentially, swallowing Ravager ships and Imperial dreadnoughts alike. Murloc watched in awe and horror as the fleets that had hounded them across the galaxy vanished into the maw of the singularity. But the hunger of the void was far from sated. As the rupture grew, Murloc realized with grim certainty that they too would be consumed by their own high-stakes endeavor. "Hold on to something," he shouted as the freighter was pulled inexorably toward the event horizon. "We're going in." The last thing Murloc saw before darkness claimed him was the fabric of reality itself unraveling around them, carrying them into an unknown beyond. Reality shattered around them as the subspace rupture expanded, consuming Karn and Frax's fleets in a maelstrom of cosmic energy. Murloc's vision swam, his body stretching and compressing in ways that defied comprehension. Through the chaos, he glimpsed the freighter, suspended within the Singularity's eye, impossibly intact amidst the swirling destruction. Exotic particles bombarded the ship's hull, creating a dazzling light show of quantum interactions. Murloc blinked in disbelief as the proto-wormhole field surrounding them stabilized, reinforced by the very forces threatening to tear them apart. "Raxar!" he shouted over the cacophony of alarms. "Get Rykax to the medbay!" The Talarian warrior scooped up the injured Gorman, her tentacles limp and unresponsive. As they disappeared down the corridor, Orlic's fingers danced across the navigation console. "We need coordinates," the grizzled captain barked. "Where the hell are we jumping to?" Murloc's mind raced. They could end up anywhere in the universe, or shred themselves across a dozen realities. His gaze fell on the collector, its crystalline surface pulsing with untapped potential. "One last gamble," he muttered, configuring the device's energy reserves. "We're going to collapse the rupture and open a new wormhole simultaneously." As Murloc worked, the impossible happened. A figure stumbled through a localized breach in the event horizon, disoriented but unmistakable. "Matthew?" Murloc gasped, scarcely believing his eyes. The human blinked, his gaze unfocused. "Murloc, I don't remember how I got here." There was no time for reunions. Murloc thrust the collector into Matthew's hands. "Help me contain this," he urged. "We need to funnel the Singularity's energy into a stable tunnel." Working in unison, human and alien wrestled with forces beyond mortal comprehension. Sweat beaded on Matthew's brow as he channeled the collector's power. Murloc's alien physiology strained under the onslaught of cosmic energies. The rupture began to seal, reality knitting itself back together. Through the closing breach, Murloc glimpsed their destination, a familiar blue-green orb. "Earth," he breathed, meeting Matthew's wide-eyed stare. The wormhole collapsed behind them as they plummeted through azure skies. Warning klaxons blared as atmospheric friction threatened to tear the ship apart. Murloc felt the deck lurch beneath his feet as Orlick fought for control. "Zara," he called out to the ship's AI, "divert all power to the force fields." The freighter pancaked into a remote valley, leaving a kilometer-long furrow of scorched earth in its wake. Silence fell, broken only by the hiss of ruptured coolant lines and the groan of stressed metal. Murloc dragged himself to his feet, helping Matthew up. They stumbled from the wreckage, blinking in the harsh sunlight, but the world that greeted them was far from the earth of human legend. Towering crystalline structures dotted the landscape, pulsing with an alien vitality. What Murloc had taken for trees were colossal plant-like entities, their branches swaying with deliberate purpose. As he watched, tendrils of light extended from the nearest formation, brushing against his consciousness. "Welcome, travelers." A telepathic voice resonated in his mind. "Your intervention succeeded, but at great cost." Matthew tensed beside him. "Murloc, what are they?" Before he could respond, the entity's message continued. "We are the inheritors of this world, evolved in humanity's absence. Our ancestors' reforms came too late. We remain sequestered from the universe you knew. The implications hit Murloc like a physical blow. They had saved existence itself, but at the price of their own place within it. As the surviving crew gathered around them, expressions of awe and trepidation on their faces, Murloc realized the weight of the choice before them. Aurelic's gruff voice broke the silence. "So what now? We're stuck here?" Matthew's gaze swept across the alien landscape, lingering on a familiar symbol etched into one of the crystal trees. The universal icon for humanity, once a beacon of defiance across the stars, now a poignant reminder of all they had lost. He turned to Murloc, a bittersweet smile on his face. "I guess we start over," Matthew said softly. "One last time."
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.